I never imagined Thailand as a place to mend what was broken inside me. At 44, after years of grinding through civil engineering projects that left me burned out and hollow, I booked the flight on a whim, a desperate bid to escape the gray skies of London and the echoes of failed relationships that had taught me to guard my heart like a fortress. Love? That was a word I'd buried deep, along with the regrets of trusting too easily, only to watch it crumble under the weight of unmet expectations. I wasn't searching for anything profound, just solitude, maybe some anonymous wanderings through bustling streets to drown out the noise in my head. But life has a way of unearthing what you think you've laid to rest. 2 years ago, I'd connected with her online Lei Hoang Mai, a vibrant Thai woman running her own e-commerce store. Our chats started innocently enough, sparked by a shared post on a business forum. I admired her fire, the way she spoke of building her brand from scratch amid the chaos of Bangkok's markets. She respected my stories of engineering feats, the bridges and structures I'd helped shape across Europe. We talked late into the nights, bridging cultures through screens, until life pulled us apart. My deadlines, her expanding business. We faded into silence, no hard feelings, just the natural drift of distant connections. Now, here I was, stepping into the humid embrace of Suvarnabhumi Airport, my message to her from a week ago still unanswered. I'd hesitated before sending it, fingers hovering over the keyboard, wondering if she'd even remember me or if time had erased whatever spark we'd shared. Heading to Thailand for a vacation? I'd written, "Would be great to catch up if you're free." No reply. I told myself it didn't matter. This trip was for me. Yet, as I unpacked in my modest hotel room overlooking the Chao Phraya River, a part of me felt the sting of rejection already. Doubt crept in. Maybe she was with someone, building a life that had no room for a confused Englishman like me. I pushed it aside, focusing on maps and itineraries, but vulnerability lingered, a quiet ache reminding me why I'd come: to disappear, not to hope. The humidity hit me like a wall as I stepped out of the airport taxi into the heart of Bangkok. It was evening, the city alive with the hum of motorbikes weaving through traffic and the distant wail of a street vendor's call. I'd chosen a small hotel in Silom, away from the tourist traps, figuring the anonymity would suit my mood. My suitcase felt heavier than it should, laden not just with clothes but with the weight of burnout that had driven me here. Back in the UK, I'd been overseeing a massive infrastructure project. This bridge rebuild had consumed my days and nights, leaving me isolated, stubborn in my refusal to admit I was falling apart. Loyal to my team, yes, but what good was loyalty when it left you empty? I checked in, the receptionist offering a polite way that I clumsily returned, feeling every bit the foreigner. My room was simple: a bed, a desk, a view of neon lights flickering against the darkening sky. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone to plan the next few days, perhaps a day trip to Ayutthaya's ruins, something historical to ground me. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed, a soft chime that cut through the silence like a lifeline I hadn't realized I was waiting for. It was her, Mai. After a week of radio silence, her message popped up. "Hey Daniel, long time." My heart stuttered. Mixed feelings flooded me: relief that she remembered, confusion about the delay, a flicker of hope I immediately tamped down. Why now? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. Part of me wanted to play it cool, but honesty won out. "Hey, Mai. Yeah, it's been ages. Actually, I'm in Thailand now, vacation mode, just arrived in Bangkok." Her reply came quicker than I'd expected. Just that. No enthusiasm, no questions. I leaned back against the headboard, the room suddenly feeling smaller. Was she disinterested? Committed to someone else? The thought twisted in my gut. 2 years ago, our chats had been effortless, her laughing emojis at my dry British humor, my genuine admiration for how she juggled suppliers and customers in her e-commerce world, selling handmade Thai crafts online. She'd shared stories of late-night inventory checks in her small warehouse, and I'd opened up about the pressures of engineering deadlines, the isolation of being the one everyone relied on but no one truly knew. But now, this felt like a barrier, a cultural nuance I didn't understand, or perhaps just a sign she'd moved on. I set the phone down, forcing myself to unpack. Socks, shirts, a notebook for sketching bridge designs out of habit. The city's sounds filtered in horns, laughter from a nearby bar. I felt out of place, an introvert in a land of vibrant chaos. Curiosity about her lingered, though. What had changed for her? Her business must have grown. She'd always been so focused, extroverted in a way that drew people in without effort. Me? I was hesitant, always had been, especially after the burnout that left me questioning every connection. The next morning, I ventured out, wandering through Lumpini Park to clear my head. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and street food. Families picnicked, joggers passed by, and I felt a quiet envy for their ease. My phone stayed silent, and I told myself it was for the best. Emotional distance was safer. I'd learned that the hard way. But as I sat on a bench, watching koi fish ripple the pond's surface, another message came. What brings you here after all this time? I exhaled, a small crack in my hesitation. Needed a break. Engineering life's been relentless. Thought Thailand might help me reset. I paused, then added, and honestly, I remembered our chats, wondered how you were. Her response took an hour. Busy as ever with the store. But if you're around, maybe coffee? No pressure. Coffee, neutral ground. My pulse quickened with uncertainty. Was this pity? Cultural politeness? I typed back. Sounds good. When? We set a time for the next day at a cafe near her shop in Chatuchak. As I walked back to the hotel, the city's unfamiliarity pressed in signs in Thai script I couldn't read. The rhythm of life so different from London's order. Internally, I hesitated. What if this stirred up old wounds? But curiosity won, a tentative step towards something unknown. The cafe was tucked in a side street, air-conditioned against the midday heat. I arrived early, nursing a black coffee, my mind racing with doubts. Then she walked in, my 31, with the same lively energy I'd imagined from our chats. Short dark hair, a simple blouse over jeans, carrying a laptop bag that screamed business owner on the go. She spotted me, smiled, a real one, though reserved, and approached. Daniel, you look just like your profile pic, she said, her English accented but fluent. I stood, awkward. My, good to finally meet in person. You haven't changed a bit. We sat, ordering iced teas. Conversation started slow. Her store's expansion into international shipping, my recent project burnout, no romance, just polite curiosity. But as she spoke of sourcing fabrics from local weavers, her eyes lit up, and I felt a pull admiration. Yes, but laced with my own emotional walls. Cultural gaps loomed. I mispronounced a Thai word, she laughed gently. Internally, I wondered if this was wise. Doubt whispered, she's just being kind. Don't read into it. We parted after an hour, a hug that was brief, platonic. Enjoy your trip, she said. Walking away, the city's bustle swallowed me. Emotional distance felt necessary, a shield against the vulnerability stirring inside. Days blurred into a routine of exploration. I rented a scooter, navigating Bangkok's alleys, visiting temples like Wat Arun where the spires pierced the sky like forgotten dreams. The heat was oppressive, but it matched the internal churn burnout's residue, making every decision feel heavy. Mai's message the next day was unexpected. How was the rest of your day? Try the street pad Thai near your hotel, best in the area. I smiled despite myself. Will do. Thanks for the tip. Small, but it opened a door. Our chats resumed. Sporadic, at first. She'd send photos of her latest product line, silk scarves, dyed with natural pigments, and I'd respond with snaps of engineering marvels I'd spotted, like the intricate bridges over the river. Your eye for structure is impressive, she wrote once. Reminds me why I respected your stories back then. Respect. It warmed me, but I kept it light. I was stubborn in my caution, introverted habits kicking in. Evenings, I'd sit on my balcony, nursing a beer, replaying our coffee meet. Her extroverted energy had filled the space, drawing out details I'd forgotten sharing online. But attraction? It simmered unspoken, a subtle tension in the air between messages. One afternoon, she invited me to her store. "If you're free, come see the chaos," she texted. I went, curiosity overriding hesitation. The shop was in a bustling market district, shelves lined with artisanal goods, jewelry, textiles, all sourced ethically. Mai was in her element, chatting with customers in rapid Thai, switching to English for a tourist. When she saw me, her face brightened. "Daniel, come, I'll show you around." We wandered the aisles, her explaining suppliers from Chiang Mai villages. I admired her passion, lively, focused, a contrast to my methodical world. "This is what keeps me going," she said, holding up a beaded necklace. "Building something real." I nodded, sharing a story of a bridge I designed that connected remote communities. Our eyes met briefly, a spark of connection, but I looked away. Emotional tension built in the silences. I sensed her glancing my way, perhaps wondering about my quiet demeanor. As closing time neared, we sat in the back room with tea. Conversation flowed easier, her challenges with online algorithms, my doubts about returning to work. No deep dives, just subtle sharing. When I left, she walked me out. "Glad you came," she said softly. Back at the hotel, the tension lingered. Attraction grew, unspoken, like a current under calm waters. But I hesitated. What if this was fleeting? Our interactions continued. A shared lunch at a riverside spot, where we discussed cultural quirks, my confusion with Thai spice levels, her amusement at British politeness. Laughter came easier, but so did the pull. One evening, as we watched the sunset from a park, her hand brushed mine accidentally. Neither pulled away immediately. The air thickened with possibility. Yet we said nothing. Doubt crept in at night. Was I reading too much? Her career focus mirrored my own. Perhaps this was just friendship, but the connection felt real, subtle threads weaving us closer amid the city's warmth. Chapter 3. Past wounds surface. Expanded. The rain came without warning that afternoon, the kind of sudden Bangkok downpour that turns streets into rivers in minutes. I had been wandering aimlessly near Chatuchak, half-heartedly looking for a new notebook to replace the one I'd filled with half-finished sketches of local bridges and canal crossings. My phone buzzed as I ducked under an awning. My store's quiet because of the rain. If you're nearby, come hide here. I have dry towels and bad instant coffee. I hesitated only long enough to feel the familiar tug of caution, then typed back, "On my way." By the time I reached her shop, my shirt clung to my skin and my shoes squelched with every step. The market stalls around her were shuttered or half abandoned. People had scattered for cover. Mai stood just inside the glass door, arms crossed, watching me approach with an amused tilt to her head. "You really are British," she said as I stepped in, dripping onto the welcome mat. "You walk in the rain like it's just another Tuesday." "Habit," I muttered, accepting the towel she handed me. "London prepares you for worse." She laughed a short, genuine sound and led me past the neatly arranged shelves of silk scarves and ceramic tea sets to the small back room she used as an office/storage. A folding table, 2 plastic chairs, a kettle that looked older than both of us. The fluorescent light flickered once, then steadied. Outside, thunder rolled low and lazy. "Sit," she said. "I'll make tea. Real tea, not the instant horror I threatened." I peeled off my soaked jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. The room smelled of cardamom, old cardboard, and the faint metallic tang of rain-soaked metal shelves. She busied herself with the kettle while I sat, feeling suddenly exposed in the small space. We had been meeting more often lately, casual lunches, evening walks along the river, but this felt different. No crowds, no agenda, just the two of us and the drumming rain. She set 2 steaming mugs in front of us and took the chair opposite. "So, you've been here almost a month now, still planning to disappear back to England soon?" The question was light, but I heard the undercurrent. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my palms. "I extended the ticket another 3 weeks," I admitted. Told myself it was because I hadn't seen Chiang Mai yet. Truth is, I'm not ready to go back to what was waiting. She studied me over the rim of her cup. "The burnout?" I nodded slowly. "Among other things." Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, but expectant. The rain tapped insistently on the corrugated roof. I took a breath. I used to think work was the answer to everything, I said. If I built something solid, bridges, roads, whatever, then the rest of life would hold together too. Loyal to the team, loyal to the deadlines. But loyalty doesn't keep you warm at night. It just keeps you busy. Mai didn't interrupt. She simply waited, the way Thai people sometimes do, patient, giving space for words to find their own rhythm. 2 years before I came here, I continued, I was engaged. Briefly. She was an architect. We talked about buildings the way other couples talk about children. Then the project in Manchester went sideways, delays, budget cuts, 18-hour days. I stopped coming home. Stopped talking. One morning she packed a suitcase and left a note saying she couldn't live with someone who was already gone. I stared into my tea. The surface trembled slightly from the vibrations of distant traffic. I told myself it was her fault for not understanding the pressure. But deep down I knew. I'd chosen the work over her long before she walked out. After that, I just shut down. Buried everything under more blueprints and concrete. Mai exhaled quietly. That's a heavy thing to carry alone. I looked up. Her expression was soft, unguarded. No pity, just recognition. Your turn, I said, half teasing, half serious. You don't get to sit there looking wise without paying the toll. She smiled faintly, then set her mug down. My parents died 7 years ago. Car accident on the way back from visiting family in Izon. One phone call and everything changed. I was 24, working a corporate job I hated, dreaming of starting something of my own. Suddenly, I had nothing left to lose. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. I quit the next week. Used what little savings I had and started the store from a single table at a weekend market. It grew slowly, too slowly at first. I worked 16-hour days, slept in the back room some nights. Friends said I was running from grief. Maybe I was. But the business gave me purpose when nothing else did. She paused, eyes distant. There was someone, too. A guy I met through a supplier. Thai, steady job, nice family. We dated for almost 2 years. I thought maybe this was it, someone who understood ambition. But the more the store grew, the more he pulled away. Said I cared more about packages and profit than about building a life together. Called me selfish, cold. Eventually, he left. Said he wanted someone who made him feel like a priority, not an afterthought. Her voice stayed even, but I saw the flicker of old hurt in her eyes. I told myself he was right, that I wasn't built for both love and work. So I chose the one thing I could control, the store. It's been safe that way. The rain had eased to a steady patter now. We sat in the quiet aftermath of confession, two people who had spent years constructing walls of purpose and distance. I don't think you're selfish, I said after a while. I think you're afraid of needing someone who might not stay. She met my gaze. And I think you're afraid of being needed, because the last time you let someone in, they left anyway. Neither of us argued. There was no need. The truth hung between us, simple and sharp. We didn't speak much after that. She offered me another towel for the walk back. I declined. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Outside, the street was slick and reflective, neon lights bleeding into puddles. Daniel, she said just before I stepped out. I turned. Thank you for telling me. I nodded once. Thank you for listening. I walked back through the cooling evening air, shirt still damp, heart strangely lighter. Not healed, not even close, but cracked open just enough for something new to breathe. The next few days carried the weight of that afternoon. We met again, once for mango sticky rice at a night market stall, once for a quiet walk through Lumpini Park at dusk. We didn't rehash the confessions. We didn't need to, but the silences between us changed. They became places where understanding lived, not just absence. One evening, sitting on a park bench, watching egrets lift off the lake in slow white arcs, she spoke without looking at me. I used to think being busy would protect me from feeling too much. I glanced at her profile, the city lights catching in her eyes. I used to think the same about building things that couldn't leave me. She turned then, and for the first time I saw something unguarded in her expression, not hope exactly, but the tentative beginning of trust. Neither of us said anything more. We didn't have to. Chapter 4. Doubts and Cultural Differences. Expanded. The first real crack appeared on a humid Thursday evening in early December. We had arranged to meet at a small riverside restaurant near Tha Tien Pier. Nothing fancy, just wooden tables under string lights. The chow pria sliding past dark and slow. Mai had suggested it days earlier, saying the grilled river prawns were worth the slight detour from her usual neighborhood. I arrived 15 minutes early, claimed a table facing the water, and ordered 2 iced coffees to wait. The sky was the color of bruised fruit, promising rain that never quite arrived. At 7:15 she still hadn't appeared. I checked my phone, no message. At 7:25 I sent one. Here already. Table by the railing. Hope traffic isn't too bad. Nothing. By 7:40 the waiter had come by twice, polite but clearly wondering if I'd been stood up. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the old reflex of assuming the worst. I told myself it was Bangkok traffic, a last-minute order at the store, anything but personal. Still, the silence gnawed. At 7:52, a message finally arrived. Sorry. Supplier called at the last minute, big problem with delayed shipment. Had to stay and sort it. Rain check? I stared at the screen. No emoji. No explanation beyond the facts. Just the cancellation and the polite phrase that in British English usually means, let's do it another time. Maybe. In Thai context, I was beginning to learn. It could mean anything from genuine regret to a gentle way of stepping back. I typed several replies and deleted them all before settling on, no problem. Hope it gets resolved. Let me know when you're free again. I paid for the coffees I hadn't touched, left a tip that felt too generous for my mood, and walked along the river promenade alone. The night market lights reflected in fractured colors on the water. Couples strolled hand in hand. Families laughed over grilled squid. I felt suddenly, sharply foreign, not just because of my pale skin or the way I still hesitated before crossing chaotic intersections, but because I didn't know how to read this moment. Was she truly swamped? Or had I misjudged the growing closeness? Had I pushed too hard by suggesting dinner so soon after our last quiet evening in the park? The next day, she sent a photo of the problematic shipment boxes stacked haphazardly in her small warehouse, customs paperwork spread across her desk, and a short voice note, finally sorted at 2 a.m. Exhausted but relieved. Sorry again about last night. Her voice sounded tired but warm. I felt a pang of guilt for the doubt that had kept me awake. I replied with a photo of the bridge sketch I'd been working on that morning. No worries. Glad it worked out. This is what I do when I can't sleep. She responded almost immediately. Beautiful lines. You should build something here one day. The exchange felt normal again. Almost. But the seed of uncertainty had taken root. Over the following week, small dissonances accumulated like dust. One afternoon, we met for coffee near her shop. She was distracted, checking her phone every few minutes, apologizing each time. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled quickly and said, just tracking a delivery. Nothing big. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to ask more, to understand why her energy seemed to ebb and flow so unpredictably. But my British instinct for restraint held me back. Instead, I nodded and changed the subject to safer ground, the upcoming Loy Krathong festival. Later that same evening, she sent a message. I might be quiet this weekend. Family coming up from Chonburi for a day trip. Haven't seen them in a while. I wrote back. That sounds nice. Enjoy the time with them. Her reply took hours. Thanks. Talk soon. Talk soon landed heavier than it should have. In my world, it was casual. In hers, I was starting to suspect it carried layers: politeness, distance, perhaps even a gentle boundary I hadn't recognized. The cultural fault lines revealed themselves in quieter ways too. I suggested, half joking, that we take a weekend trip to Kanchanaburi, see the bridge over the River Kwai, walk through the national park, escape the city for 48 hours. I framed it lightly. No pressure, just a change of air. She hesitated in person the next time we met, stirring her iced latte longer than necessary. It sounds lovely, she said carefully. But weekends are complicated. My aunt expects me for Sunday lunch almost every week when she's in town. And the store has a big online promotion coming up. I'd feel guilty leaving everything to my part-timer. I nodded, understanding the words but not quite the weight behind them. Of course, I said. Family comes first. She searched my face. You're not upset? No, I lied, then corrected myself. Maybe a little disappointed. But I get it. Different priorities. She reached across the table and touched my wrist briefly light, reassuring. It's not that I don't want to go. It's just timing. I believed her. But the gap between wanting and doing felt wider than it should. Another evening, over street food near Victory Monument, she told me a story about a friend who had married a British man 5 years earlier. They lived in Phuket now. She loves him, Mai said, peeling shrimp with practiced fingers. But she says the hardest part wasn't the language. It was the expectations. He wanted spontaneous weekends away. She wanted to know plans weeks in advance because her parents might need her, or a festival might come up, or the shop might have a rush. He thought she was being rigid. She thought he was being selfish. They almost separated twice before they figured out how to meet in the middle. She looked at me then, direct and quiet. I don't want to be that couple who keeps misunderstanding each other until it hurts too much to fix. The words hung between us like smoke from the grill. I don't either, I said. But privately, I wondered if we were already on that path. The tension wasn't explosive, no shouting, no slammed doors. It was respectful, careful, almost courteous. We kept meeting, kept talking, but a new caution entered our exchanges. I stopped suggesting plans more than 2 or 3 days ahead. She stopped apologizing quite so profusely when work pulled her away. We both tiptoed around the unspoken question. How much compromise was reasonable before one of us felt erased? One night, alone in my hotel room, I sat on the balcony overlooking the glittering sprawl of Bangkok and tried to name what I was feeling. Not anger, not rejection exactly. Something quieter and more insidious. The fear that our differences weren't just cultural trivia to laugh about over beers, but fault lines deep enough to swallow whatever fragile thing we were building. I opened my notebook and sketched the silhouette of a bridge, not one I'd ever built, but one I imagined, 2 halves reaching toward each other across a wide, dark river, never quite touching in the middle. I stared at it for a long time. The next morning I woke to a message from Mai. Free this evening? There's a small temple fair near my place. Nothing big, just food, lights, music, if you want to come. I read it twice, feeling the cautious hope return. I typed back, I'd like that. No grand declarations, no promises, just a small step across the divide, both of us aware now of how easily it could widen again. Chapter 5. Growing Attachment. Expanded. The weeks after the temple fair slipped into something that felt dangerously close to routine, the kind of quiet rhythm I hadn't known I was capable of anymore. Mornings began the same way now. I'd wake to the low drone of river traffic outside my hotel window, make coffee from the instant packets provided, and open my phone to find her good morning message already waiting. Usually a photo of whatever she was unpacking that day, a crate of woven bamboo baskets, a bolt of hand-dyed cotton, once even a small ceramic elephant she'd bought on impulse from a Chiang Mai artisan who'd driven down to deliver it personally. The messages were never long, never demanding, just a small tether across the city. New stock arrived. This one's my favorite so far, she'd write, followed by the picture. I'd reply with whatever I was looking at, a sketch of the Rama 8th Bridge at dawn, the way the cables caught the first light like harp strings, or a quick shot of my breakfast cow tom from the street cart downstairs, steam rising in the cool air. Fuel for another day of pretending I know where I'm going, I'd caption it. She always answered within the hour, even on busy mornings. That consistency, small as it was, began to feel like gravity. We met most evenings now. Not every day, neither of us wanted to force it, but often enough that the city started rearranging itself around our habits. The bench near the pier where we'd eaten grilled squid, the first time we talked about family. The narrow soi behind her shop where a vendor sold perfect mango sticky rice after 8 p.m. The riverside path along Charo and Krung, where the old shophouses glowed under fairy lights, and the air smelled faintly of incense from nearby shrines. These places became ours without anyone saying so. One Tuesday, she texted mid-afternoon, "Sale day chaos. If you're free around 6, come help pack orders. I'll feed you afterward." I went. The store was alive when I arrived, customers browsing, her part-timer running the register, Mai moving between shelves and the packing station, like someone conducting an orchestra only she could hear. She spotted me, waved me behind the counter without ceremony. "Here," she said, handing me a stack of bubble wrap and tape. "Small, fragile items go in these boxes. Write the name and province on the label. Easy." I followed instructions, surprised at how quickly the work absorbed me. The repetitive motions: fold, wrap, tape, label quieted the background hum of doubt that still lived in my head most days. She worked beside me, shoulders almost touching, occasionally brushing my arm when she reached for more tape. Neither of us commented on it. Around 8:30, the last customer left. The part-timer locked up and went home. Mai turned the sign to "closed," dimmed the front lights, and collapsed into the chair behind the counter with an exaggerated sigh. "Survived," she announced. I handed her a bottle of water from the mini-fridge. "You're terrifyingly efficient." She laughed, took a long drink, then looked at me sideways. "You're not bad yourself. Steady hands. Engineer precision." We ended up eating pad kra pao at a plastic table place 2 streets over. The kind of spot locals go because the chili is punishing and the price is honest. She ordered extra basil for both plates without asking. I didn't complain. Conversation drifted from the day's small victories, her first international order to Australia, to quieter things. "I used to hate evenings," she said at one point, pushing rice around her plate. "After the store closed, the silence felt too big. Now, it's different." I met her eyes. "Different how?" She shrugged, almost shy. "Less empty." I didn't push, but the words stayed with me. Attachment grew in these unspectacular moments. The way she'd text me a photo of a particularly beautiful sunset she knew I'd like. The evening she brought me a small wooden puzzle box from her stock because, "You like building things, figure this one out." The night we sat on the steps of Wat Arun after closing hours, sharing a single bottle of chilled Singha while the temple lights reflected on the water, and she told me almost casually about the grandmother who taught her how to bargain at markets when she was 6. I told her things too. About the bridge in Portugal that nearly collapsed during construction because of a miscalculated wind load, and how I still woke up sometimes convinced I'd made the same mistake on every project since. About the flat in London I hadn't set foot in for months before coming here, how the fridge light still came on when no one was home. About the stubborn part of me that believed if I just worked harder, stayed longer, everything would eventually hold together. She listened the way she always did, quiet, present, no rush to fix anything. One Saturday, she closed the store early, rare for her, and we took the ferry across to Thornbury. No plan, just walking. We ended up at a small park beside the canal, watching long-tail boats slice through the green water. She sat close enough that our thighs touched when we leaned back on our hands. Neither of us moved away. After a long silence, she said, "I've been thinking about what happens when your visa runs out." The question had been hovering between us for weeks. I felt it land like a stone in still water. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I could apply for an extension, or go home and figure out how to come back." She nodded slowly. "And if you go home?" I turned to look at her. The late afternoon light caught the edges of her hair, turning it almost auburn. "Then I'd miss this," I said. "I'd miss you. A lot." She didn't look away. "I'd miss you too." No declarations followed. No kiss under dramatic golden light. Just that admission, plain and unguarded, hanging in the humid air. Fear of loss sharpened after that. Every meeting carried a faint undertow of urgency, not desperate but real. I started noticing how quickly the days passed, how the calendar on my phone crept closer to the new departure date. I hadn't yet decided whether to change. When she laughed at something I said, or when her hand rested on my forearm for a second longer than necessary, the thought flashed, what if this ends? What if I walk away from the one place and the one person that finally feels like it fits? One evening, After a quiet dinner of tom yum at her favorite hole in the wall, we walked back toward the river. The sky was bruised purple, streetlights just flickering on. She slipped her hand into mine without preamble. Our fingers laced together naturally, as though we'd done it 100 times. We didn't speak for several blocks. When we reached the pier where the ferries had stopped running for the night, she stopped and turned to face me. "Daniel," she said softly, "whatever happens next, I'm glad you stayed this long." I swallowed. "Me too." She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to my cheek, brief, warm, deliberate. Then she stepped back, smiled the small, private smile I'd come to recognize as hers alone, and said, "See you tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I echoed. I watched her disappear into the crowd, hands still tingling where she'd touched it. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the half-packed suitcase in the corner. For the first time since arriving, the thought of leaving felt less like escape and more like amputation. Attachment had taken root. Deep, uninvited at first, now impossible to ignore. And with it came the quiet terror of losing something I hadn't realized I could still want. Chapter 6. Emotional conflict, misunderstanding, expanded. The shift happened quietly at first, the way a tide turns without anyone noticing until the sand is suddenly bare. It started with her message on a Wednesday morning in mid-January. I had just finished a slow breakfast of cow niao mamuang at the usual street stall and was planning to wander over to the Jim Thompson House Museum, something low-key, touristy, a way to fill the hours until evening when we usually met. Her text arrived at 10:47. "Hey, crazy week ahead. New collection launch on Friday, plus inventory audit, plus my cousin's wedding prep in Nonthaburi this weekend. Might need to go quiet for a bit. Hope you're okay." I read it twice, searching for tone in the flat black letters. No emoji. No "talk soon" or "miss you already." Just the facts, delivered efficiently, the same way she might update a supplier about a delayed shipment. I typed back carefully. "Understood. Sounds like a lot. Good luck with everything. Let me know when things calm down." Her reply came 20 minutes later. "Thanks. Will do." That was it. I told myself it was nothing. She had warned me early on how consuming her business could be peaks and valleys, deadlines that didn't care about personal calendars. I'd seen it myself during the sale week when she'd barely slept. This was simply another crest. But the silence stretched. Thursday passed with no message. Friday neither. I didn't send anything, didn't want to add pressure when she was already buried. Instead, I walked more than usual, looping through alleys in Banglamphu, past temples I hadn't noticed before, trying to outpace the growing unease in my chest. Saturday evening, I broke and sent a simple check-in. "How's the launch going? Hope it's going smoothly." No red receipt. No dots. Nothing. By Sunday afternoon, the quiet had thickened into something heavier. I sat on the hotel balcony, overlooking the river, phone face down on the table, replaying every recent conversation for clues I might have missed. Had I said something wrong at our last dinner? Pushed too hard when I asked casually about her long-term plans for the store? Or was it the opposite? Had I been too careful, too restrained, leaving her unsure where I stood? The longer the silence lasted, the louder my mind became. I began filling the gaps with worst-case stories. She had decided the cultural differences were too much after all. Or she'd met someone local, someone who fit more easily into her routines and family expectations. Or most painfully, she had simply realized I was a pleasant distraction during a slow period. But now real life had resumed, and there was no room left. I hated how quickly doubt could spiral. It felt like betrayal of everything we'd built, yet I couldn't stop it. Burnout had taught me this pattern years ago. When connection faltered, I retreated first, convinced withdrawal was safer than vulnerability. Monday came. Still nothing. I walked to her neighborhood anyway, telling myself I was just stretching my legs. I passed the shop without stopping, lights on, a few customers inside, her silhouette moving behind the counter. She looked focused, the same lively energy she always carried when working. I stood across the street for a minute, hidden behind a parked tuk-tuk, feeling foolish and exposed. Then I turned and left before she could glance up and see me lurking like some heartbroken cliché. That night I drank more than usual 3 beers on the balcony instead of 1. The city lights blurred. I opened my notebook and tried to sketch, but the lines came out jagged, uncertain. Eventually, I wrote instead. Raw fragments I'd never show anyone. She's pulling away. Maybe she always was. Maybe I imagined the rest. Tuesday morning brought a single message. Sorry for going dark. Wedding was exhausting family stuff. Launch went okay, but numbers are lower than hoped. Still catching up. Talk later? Relief crashed into me first, then irritation at her, at myself, at the way 2 short sentences could swing my mood so violently. I replied, glad it's over. No rush. Whenever you're ready. But, whenever you're ready, carried an edge I hadn't intended. Passive-aggressive. I regretted sending it the moment it went through. She didn't respond. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. Sporadic, clipped messages from her side when she remembered to reply, and long silences in between. When we did exchange words, they felt careful, stripped of the easy warmth that had grown over the previous months. No photos of new stock, no teasing about my terrible Thai pronunciation, no see you soon. I stopped suggesting we meet. She didn't propose anything either. The distance hurt more than any argument could have. Words at least give shape to pain. Silence lets it spread unchecked. Every unanswered message felt like confirmation that whatever we'd had was fragile, conditional, already fading. One evening I sat in Lumphinney Park alone, the same bench where we'd once watched egrets lift off the water. The park was quieter now, the dry season settling in, the air cooler but no less humid. A group of teenagers played badminton under floodlights. Couples walked hand in hand. I felt like a ghost among them. My phone stayed dark. I thought about booking a flight home. The idea arrived fully formed, almost comforting in its finality. Pack up, leave Bangkok behind, return to the grey predictability of London where disappointment was at least familiar. No more waiting for messages that might never come. No more second-guessing every pause. But the thought of walking away without understanding why stung worse than staying. I opened our chat history and scrolled upward weeks of small, ordinary moments now preserved in digital amber. Her photo of the ceramic elephant, my sketch of the bridge at dawn, the voice note where she laughed about burning her tongue on Tom Yum. Evidence that it had been real, at least for a while. I closed the app and stared at the dark lake. Silence, I realized, was its own language, and right now it was speaking louder than either of us ever had. I didn't message her that night. She didn't message me. We retreated each into our separate routines, our separate fears, leaving the fragile thread between us, stretched thin, trembling, not yet broken but no longer taut with promise. Chapter 7. Crisis of the Heart expanded. The silence stretched into its 8th day. I had stopped counting the hours, but the calendar on my phone didn't lie. January 26th, almost 3 weeks since our last real conversation, the brief, clipped exchange after her cousin's wedding, 3 weeks of messages that arrived like afterthoughts, or didn't arrive at all. 3 weeks of me telling myself it was fine, she was busy, this was normal, while the quiet inside my chest grew louder and more accusing. I woke that morning to the same ritual: coffee, phone check, nothing. The hotel room felt smaller than ever, the river view outside the window, mocking me with its indifferent beauty. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the half-packed suitcase I still hadn't fully committed to unpacking again. The new flight options were open in my browser tab: London, one way, departing in 10 days. I hadn't booked it yet, but I hadn't closed the tab either. Self-doubt arrived in waves that day, each one higher than the last. I walked to Lumphinney Park because staying still felt unbearable. The same paths we'd walked together now felt haunted. Every bench carried a memory. The one where she'd slipped her hand into mine without preamble. The one where we'd watched the egrets lift off at dusk, and she'd said my name like it mattered. I sat on our bench anyway, stubborn, punishing myself with the reminder. Why had I let it go this far? Why hadn't I pushed harder when the silences started lengthening? The old voices returned, louder now. You're too reserved, too British, too afraid of seeming needy. She probably thinks you don't care enough to fight for it. Or worse, she knows you care and that's exactly why she's pulling back. Because needing someone scares her as much as it scares you. I thought about the night she'd kissed my cheek at the pier. The warmth of it had lingered for hours. Now it felt like a promise I'd failed to keep. By afternoon, the doubt had hardened into something colder. The conviction that I was unwanted. Not hated, not rejected outright, just unnecessary. A pleasant interlude in her life that had run its course. She had her store, her family obligations, her carefully constructed world. I was the foreigner who showed up for a few months, stirred things up, and would eventually leave. Easier for everyone if the leaving happened quietly. I opened our chat again, scrolled through months of messages until the warmth turned to ache. The last photo she'd sent me was still there. A close-up of a new silk scarf, deep indigo with gold threading. "This one reminds me of the river at night," she'd written. I'd replied, "Beautiful, like you." She'd sent back a single heart emoji. Simple, devastating now in its scarcity. I typed a message I never sent. "I don't know what changed. But if this is you stepping away, just tell me. I'd rather hear it than guess." My thumb hovered over delete. I closed the app instead. Evening fell. I didn't eat. I walked instead, aimless loops through Siloam, past closed shops and neon signs flickering to life. The city pulsed around me, indifferent. At some point, I found myself outside her shop. Lights were off, shutter down. I stood across the street again, same spot behind the tuk-tuk pole, feeling ridiculous and raw. A thought struck me hard. What if she was inside right now, working late, alone, carrying the same doubt I was? What if the silence wasn't rejection but fear? The same fear that had kept me from saying more when I should have. I pulled out my phone. Fingers trembling slightly from cold and nerves. I typed, "If this is over, just say. I won't make it harder than it needs to be. But I need to know." I stared at the words. Honest. Vulnerable. Terrifying. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The message went through. Delivered. No. Read receipt. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. The ache in my chest became physical, a tight, burning pressure behind my ribs. I turned away from the shop and started walking back toward the hotel, each step heavier. The relationship felt at risk now in a way it hadn't before, not from cultural gaps or busy schedules, but from the simple, brutal possibility that neither of us knew how to bridge the last inch. Back in the room, I sat on the balcony. The city glittered below, endless and uncaring. I thought about going home not as escape anymore, but as surrender. I could rebuild the walls, return to the solitary routines that had kept me safe before. No more hoping, no more hurting. But the idea tasted like ash. I opened the notebook, where I'd sketched bridges that never quite connected. I turned to a blank page and wrote, not a sketch this time, but words. I came here to disappear. Instead, I found something I didn't know I was looking for. And now I'm terrified of losing it before I even understand what it is. I closed the notebook. Tears came then, quiet, unexpected, not dramatic sobs, just the slow release of pressure that had been building for weeks. I let them fall without shame. Midnight passed. Still no reply. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling fan. Just the deep, private fear that I had misread everything, that the connection I'd felt growing had been one-sided, or worse, mutual but too fragile to survive real life. I thought about her face when she'd thanked me for telling her about my past, the way her eyes had softened, the way she'd touched my wrist when I'd admitted disappointment, small gestures that had felt enormous at the time. Was that all illusion? Or had we both retreated so far into self-protection that we'd forgotten how to reach across? I didn't know. And that not knowing was the worst part. Around 2 a.m., I picked up the phone again. The screen was still dark. I whispered into the empty room. Barely audible. Please. Not a prayer exactly. Just the last honest thing I had left. Then I turned off the light and lay in the dark, heart hammering, waiting for a sign that might never come. The relationship hung suspended, precious, precarious, at the edge of breaking, and all I could do was feel the full weight of how much I wanted it to hold. Chapter 8. Emotional clarity and love expanded. The call came at 2:37 a.m. My phone lit up on the nightstand, vibrating against the wood with a soft insistence that pulled me from shallow, restless sleep. I fumbled for it, squinting at the screen. Mai's name. Not a message, a voice call. I answered before the second ring, heart already hammering. Hello. A small pause, then her voice quiet, slightly hoarse, as though she'd been crying or hadn't spoken in hours. Daniel, can we talk? In person. Now. I sat up, fully awake. Where are you? At the park. Our bench. The one by the lake? I'm coming. I didn't ask why she was there at this hour, or how long she'd been waiting. I just pulled on yesterday's clothes, grabbed my room key, and left. The hotel lobby was empty except for the night security guard who nodded sleepily as I passed. Outside, the city had quieted to a low hum, occasional motorbike engines, distant laughter from a late-night bar, the soft lap of the river against concrete embankments. The walk to Lumpini Park took 20 minutes. The air was cooler than it had been in weeks, the dry season breeze carrying faint jasmine from somewhere nearby. My mind raced the whole way, rehearsing apologies, explanations, worst-case scenarios. But underneath the noise was something steadier. Relief that she had called. That she hadn't let the silence become permanent. The park gate was closed, but the side entrance near the exercise stations was always left ajar at night for joggers and insomniacs. I slipped through, followed the familiar path past the paddleboat dock, past the row of flame trees now bare of blossoms. The bench came into view under a single sodium lamp, her silhouette small against the dark water. She stood when she saw me, arms wrapped around herself despite the mild night. No makeup, hair pulled into a loose knot, wearing the same oversized hoodie she sometimes slept in when she worked late at the store. She looked exhausted, beautiful, terrified. I stopped a few paces away, giving her space. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I nodded. I would have come sooner if I'd known. We sat her on one end of the bench, me on the other, a careful meter of wood between us. The lake reflected the scattered lights of the city skyline. A lone egret stood motionless at the water's edge, white against black. She spoke first. I didn't mean to disappear like that. I told myself I needed space to focus. Launch, wedding, family, everything piling up. But it wasn't just that. She exhaled shakily. I got scared. Really, really scared. You were becoming important. Too important. And I started thinking, what happens when you leave? What happens if I let myself rely on someone who might not stay? I've done that before. So, I pulled back. Told myself it was easier this way. Cleaner. She looked down at her hands, twisting the sleeve of her hoodie. But it wasn't easier. It hurt worse. Every day I didn't message you felt like lying to both of us. I kept checking my phone, hoping you'd write first, then hating myself for hoping. And when you finally sent that message, "If this is over, just say," I froze. I read it probably 50 times. I wanted to reply. I couldn't. I listened without interrupting. The words landed heavy, each one a mirror to feelings I'd carried alone for weeks. "I thought you were done with me," I said quietly when she paused. That I'd misread everything. That maybe I'd been a distraction or a novelty, and now real life had caught up. I sat in that hotel room, imagining you realizing how mismatched we are, different countries, different expectations, different ways of handling silence. I almost booked a flight home yesterday. Thought it would be kinder to both of us. Her head snapped up. You were going to leave without saying goodbye? I didn't want to force you into anything. If you didn't want this anymore, I didn't want to make it harder by begging. She closed her eyes for a moment. I never stopped wanting this. I just didn't know how to keep it without losing myself in the process. Silence settled again, not the painful one of the past weeks, but something softer. Breathing room. I shifted closer, not touching yet. I said, I'm not asking you to drop everything, your store, your family, your life here. I know what that costs. I've paid that price before, and I won't ask you to. But I also won't pretend I'm okay walking away. These months, you've made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Not just the engineer, not just the guy who fixes things. Me, the quiet, stubborn, sometimes too cautious me. And I don't want to lose that. She looked at me, then really looked, eyes searching mine in the dim light. I'm scared too, I continued. Scared of being needed and failing again. Scared of leaving and regretting it for the rest of my life. But I'm more scared of never trying, of letting fear decide for us. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I don't want easy, she whispered. I want real. Even when it's messy. Even when we misunderstand each other. Even when work or family or distance pulls at us. I want to figure it out with you. I reached across the bench, then slowly, giving her time to pull away if she needed to. She didn't. My hand found hers. Her fingers were cold. Mine probably were too. We laced them together anyway. I'm not going anywhere yet, I said. Visa's extendable. And after that, we'll see. One step at a time. No grand promises, no rushing. Just choosing this us every day we can. She let out a small, broken laugh through tears. You make it sound so simple. It's not. But it's worth it. She leaned toward me then, resting her forehead against mine. We stayed like that for a long minute, breathing the same air, feeling the warmth return between us. No kiss yet, not dramatic, not cinematic, just presence. Proof that we were both still here. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. I'm sorry I hurt you, she said. I'm sorry I retreated instead of reaching out sooner. She smiled, small, tired, real. We're both idiots. Agree. We sat longer, hands still joined, watching the sky lighten from black to deep indigo at the horizon. The first birds began calling across the lake. The egret lifted off in a slow, graceful arc and disappeared into the mist. Eventually, she spoke again, voice steadier now. I want you to meet my family. Not tomorrow when it feels right, but soon. They should know who's been making me smile at my phone like an idiot for months. I chuckled softly. I'd like that. And when you're ready, I'll show you London. The gray skies, the terrible coffee, the bridges I helped build. All of it. Deal. We stood. She stepped into me, arms around my waist, head against my chest. I held her close, tight enough to feel her heartbeat, gentle enough to let her breathe. When we finally started walking back toward the gate, dawn was breaking, properly pink and gold bleeding across the water. The city was waking. Street vendors rolling carts into position, joggers appearing on the paths, the first ferries sounding their horns on the river. Hand in hand, we left the park. Love didn't arrive like fireworks or a sudden epiphany. It arrived in the calm aftermath of confession. Quiet, earned, chosen. Not idealized. Not perfect. Just two people who had looked at the cracks in themselves and in each other and decided deliberately, maturely to build around them instead of walking away. We didn't speak much on the walk back to her neighborhood. We didn't need to. At the corner near her shop, she stopped and turned to me. Coffee tomorrow morning? She asked. My place. I make better than the hotel stuff. I smiled, the first real one in weeks. Tomorrow morning, I'll bring the sketch I started of the bridge over the lake. The one that finally connects both sides. She rose on her toes, kissed me, then soft, lingering, tasting faintly of salt from earlier tears and the promise of more mornings like this. See you at 8, she whispered against my lips. 8, I echoed. I watched her disappear up the narrow soi, hoodie sleeves pulled over her hands, steps lighter now. Then I turned toward the hotel, dawn light warming my face, heart steady for the first time in a long time. Not the end of doubt or difficulty, just the beginning of choosing each other through it. Peaceful, real, ours.